Hey guys, tonight we begin in a quiet rural village in 1930s Korea. The morning mist clings to the thatched rooftops. Chickens scatter. A young girl, maybe 14, maybe 16, helps her mother wash rice in a wooden bowl. She has no idea this is the last ordinary morning she'll ever have. Because within the hour, men in uniform will arrive. They'll knock. They'll smile. They'll hand her family a paper with official-looking stamps. It says she's been selected for work, for opportunity, for something that will change her life. And it will, but not the way they think. This isn't a war story with glory. It's one of the darkest systems ever built to break girls. And if you're imagining you could survive it well, spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if slow and gentle storytelling is truly your thing. And while you're here, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up early. Your mother is already outside, sweeping the yard with a straw broom. You hear her humming a folk tune under her breath, the kind that always makes you feel safe. You get dressed, your clothes are plain but clean, and you begin another day like the one before it. Or so you think. Then you hear it. Boots. You live in an occupied country, and the sound of boots doesn't mean mail delivery or helpful government officials. It means soldiers, Japanese soldiers. Your heart speeds up. You weren't told to be afraid, not officially, but everyone is. They come to your door, and your father steps forward, confused, trying to smile. There's a clipboard, a name, your name, and a few other girls in the village too. You're being recruited, they say, for nursing or factory work. Something patriotic, something helpful to the empire. It's an honor, they insist, a duty. Your mother's mouth tightens. She knows better than to argue. You look at her. Her hands are trembling, but she nods. And in that moment, without saying a word, she gives you away to something neither of you understands. You're told to pack quickly, nothing heavy, a bag, some underthings. You tuck in your only photograph, the one with your younger sister clinging to your side. You promise yourself you'll come back soon. You promise her, too. They load you into the back of a truck. It's already half filled with girls you know. Girls you went to school with. Girls who laughed with you during chores or snuck rice balls into your hands when you forgot your lunch. None of them are talking now. The ride is long, dusty. No one tells you where you're going. No one tells you what to expect. But somewhere inside, you know it isn't going to be a job in a city. It's not going to be work you can talk about. One of the girls starts to cry. The soldier closest to her says nothing, just stares ahead, like he doesn't hear her, or like he hears it every day. Eventually, the truck stops. You're taken into a building with high fences and a heavy door. You step inside, and something in you shuts off. The air is stale. The windows are barred. And from the room next to yours, you hear someone scream. You won't know the full truth of this place until later. Until it's too late. But right now, all you know is that everything familiar is gone. Your village, your family, your name even. Because soon, they'll take that from you, too. And to understand how this horrifying system was designed and how it trapped thousands of girls just like you, We have to follow your first steps deeper into the station. They give you new clothes, not a uniform, not a dress, something else, cheap fabric, a little too tight, a little too thin. You don't understand the purpose of it yet, but your stomach tightens when you put it on. A woman helps you change. She's older, maybe in her 30s. Her face is distant, eyes flat, like she's halfway disappeared. She doesn't ask your name. She doesn't smile. She just tells you to hurry. Then they take your bag, not just to search it, to keep it. You try to argue, but the soldier raises a hand, not to hit you, just to gesture, like you're being too loud. You are too loud. You ask about the job, the factory, the hospital. You ask when you'll start. They don't answer. Instead, they give you papers to sign. Not that it matters, they're already stamped, already filled out. In Japanese, you can't read them. You try anyway. One word stands out in Korean: work. You cling to it like a lifeline. You hear them whisper it again: comfort. That's what you've been brought for. You don't know what it means yet, but you will. The older woman takes you to a side room. The walls are cracked. The curtain between beds is stained. There's a man with a stethoscope and a clipboard. He's not gentle. They check you everywhere. They say it's for your health, but it feels like inventory. You're not sick. You're not even a person in their eyes. Just something to be processed, measured, cleared. There's no explanation, no consent. Just a nod, a scribble on a form, and then you're done. Next, they take your photograph. Not for a family album, for their records. You're numbered now. A girl from Korea, aged somewhere between school and womanhood, now reduced to an entry on a chart. You are part of something, but not a job, not a mission, a system. You ask again about the work. The woman just sighs. She touches your shoulder, then pulls her hand away, like she wants to say something, but doesn't. Then they show you your new room. It has a bed, a curtain, a small basin with water that doesn't smell clean. The walls are too thin, and on the other side you hear sounds. Voices, doors slamming, a girl crying, a man laughing. There's a tin bucket in the corner. You wonder if that's your bathroom. You sit on the bed. You try not to breathe too deeply. The mattress sags like it's been used 100 times by 100 girls. You feel sick, but there's nothing to throw up. Hours pass, maybe days. You don't know anymore. They bring you food, but your stomach knots at the smell. Rice, thin soup, sometimes bread. You force yourself to eat, not because you're hungry, but because you're scared of what will happen if you don't. Eventually, the door opens again. Another man enters. Not a soldier, a customer. He doesn't look at you like a person. He looks at you like something rented, something already paid for. That's when you realize you're not here to make bandages, not to serve tea in an office, not to roll bullets or nurse the wounded. You're here for something else, something they didn't write in the papers. The job is you. You don't understand everything yet, but you don't need to. The first night tells you more than any document could. You try to fight. You scream. You bite. He hits you. No one comes. When he leaves, you're shaking, bleeding, alone. You lie on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember your sister's laugh, your father's voice, anything real. But all you can hear now is the sound of the door opening. Because the first man wasn't the last. They come again and again. You lose track. You lose days. You lose parts of yourself. The only thing you don't lose is the number. It's written on a card beside the bed. And now, to understand how this entire machinery worked, how it took girls like you and fed them into a silent war built behind closed doors, we have to look at the system itself. Because it wasn't just a room, it was a blueprint, and it spread further than you think. You learn the schedule quickly, not because they tell you, but because your body forces you to. Morning is when the soldiers line up. Not in formation, in silence, one by one. A queue outside your room, like it's a mess hall or a post office. You wake to the sound of boots again, but this time they don't stop at the door. They come in, they come through. And when they leave, they don't take anything except your silence. The older girls call this place a comfort station. The term is a joke that no one laughs at. Comfort as if anyone here is comforted. The only people who feel anything close to comfort are the ones walking in and out of your room like it's theirs. The soldiers don't speak Korean. You don't speak Japanese. Not well. But you don't need words to understand commands, or pain, or what it means to nod when they tell you to kneel. Some men are cruel. Some are quiet. Some ask your name. Some don't even look you in the eye. You learn not to hope for kindness. It just makes it worse when it doesn't come. You are given quotas. They don't say it that way, but that's what it is. 10 men per day, 20 if the unit is moving. There are check-ins. Weekly medical inspections. If you're sick, they isolate you. Not for your safety, for theirs. They give you something called 726 powder. You don't know what it is, but it burns going down. They say it's to keep you clean. Some girls say it kills the sickness. Others say it just masks it. One girl collapses after drinking it. They drag her out. She doesn't come back. There's a book, a log, your number, not your name, written beside dates, tallies, symbols. You try not to look, but you see your own entry once. Your number beside a line of red marks. You stop counting after 12. There's no privacy, no locks, no closed doors. At night, you sleep in your clothes, not out of modesty, out of fear. One of the girls, a girl named Yoonhee, tried to hide a knife once. She was caught. She hasn't spoken since. You start to forget the sound of your own voice. You also stop bleeding. At first, you think it's the stress. Then you wonder if you're pregnant. You're not. Not this time. But some girls are. And that's when the worst rumors begin. You don't want to believe them. You don't want to think about what happens to the ones who can't work anymore. But you notice something. Every few weeks, someone disappears. No one talks about it. They just glance sideways. Eyes on the floor. Another bed gets filled. Another number takes the place. They rotate you between rooms, between stations. You start forgetting where you are. Burma, China, the Philippines. It doesn't matter. The walls look the same. The screams sound the same. The sky is always far away. You try to keep one thing hidden, a tiny square of paper with your sister's name written on it, folded and refolded so many times the ink is almost gone. You don't pray, but sometimes you just stare at it, like it's a thread pulling you back to a world that once made sense. One night after a long line of soldiers, you lie still on the floor. The mattress is soaked. Your skin is raw. You close your eyes and try to imagine water. a river, trees, birds, anything except this. That's when a new girl arrives. She's even younger than you were, still wearing a ribbon in her hair. She looks around the room like she doesn't understand what it is yet. You want to tell her something, warn her, save her, but the words die in your throat. Instead, you help her make her bed. You show her where to put her shoes. You nod toward the door. She nods back. It's a quiet agreement, not survival, just endurance. And this station? It isn't just one place. There are hundreds, thousands of girls, different names, different languages, same uniform, same number, same silence. The system is too big, too organized. This didn't happen by accident. It wasn't the chaos of war, it was policy. And to understand how they built this machine, to understand how governments turn teenagers into tools, we need to follow the blueprint even further back. Because someone signed the orders, someone kept the records, and the paper trail doesn't burn as easily as memory. They told you this was for the war effort, that you were helping the empire, that your suffering was necessary. But behind all those words was a structure. Clean, organized, deliberate. You weren't captured by accident. You were recruited by design. Back in your village, there had been recruiters. Some were civilians, some wore government uniforms. Others were Korean themselves, men who worked for the occupying administration. They came offering work, money, education. But they didn't just knock on your door out of convenience. They had names, locations, ages, records. You learn later, much later, that these weren't rumors. There were official orders, signed memos, minutes from meetings where they decided how many comfort women were needed for each military outpost. 10 per battalion, 50 for a major city. Hundreds near the front lines. And the worst part? The language they used. Volunteer corps, recreation centers, moral support stations. You weren't even a person to them, just a statistic in a logistics chain. The facilities had rules, schedules, medical checkups, inventory counts. The Japanese military claimed it was to protect soldiers from disease or scandal, but really it was control. Control over bodies, control over memory. They justified it all. They said it was for hygiene, for discipline, for morale. And if anyone asked questions, they lied. Even after the war, they kept lying. You find out, long after you're freed, that the highest levels of military command knew. Not just officers, ministers, generals. They created the documents, built the barracks, managed the transfers. And perhaps worst of all, they erased the records when it ended. They called it classified or denied it ever existed. But the survivors like you carry the evidence in your bones. One of the other girls, Hana, had been kept in a station near the Philippines. She was moved 6 times in 2 years. Every time a base fell, she was loaded into another truck. Different guards, same routine, same pain. You both talk about it one night, quietly. She describes the paperwork she once saw. A ledger on an officer's desk. Names listed under the heading Resources. Not women. Resources. And the stations themselves, you start to realize, weren't just in one place. They stretched across every front of Japan's expansion. Korea, China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Burma, Indonesia. Anywhere the army marched, the comfort system followed. This wasn't rogue behavior. It wasn't a handful of criminals. It was built into the war itself. And you? You were just one cog in that massive, brutal engine. There were different types of facilities. Some were tents and jungles. Others were concrete buildings near military ports. Some had one room, some had dozens, but all of them shared one thing: silence. No press, no letters, no visitors. Just a line of soldiers and the creak of a cot that never stopped. The women came from everywhere: Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia. Many were teenagers. Some were as young as 12. Most never signed anything. Those who did didn't understand what they were signing. It wasn't legal. It wasn't moral. It wasn't forgotten. Because even now, decades later, you can still feel it. The shape of that room, the smell of that blanket, the sound of footsteps outside your door always stopping, always starting again. And here's the truth they don't want to tell you. This didn't end when the war ended. It ended when they no longer needed you. And when they left, they didn't bring you home. They left you behind. And to understand what that kind of abandonment does to a person, to a whole generation of women, we need to follow the trucks one last time. Not forward, but backward. To the moment when the station closes and the door never opens again. The war ends not with warning, not with fanfare, just a shift in the silence. Fewer footsteps, shorter lines. One morning, the men don't show up. The guards stop barking orders. They start packing instead. Uniforms vanish, trucks roll out. And they don't take you with them. No one tells you it's over. You just notice that no one's coming anymore. The door doesn't creak open. The cot stays still. You peek outside. The post is half empty. Dust swirls where boots used to stomp. Someone drops their ration box. You hear it hit the ground, then nothing. And now, you're left behind. The station is still standing. So are the girls. But you're no longer needed. You'd think freedom would feel like a sunrise. But it doesn't. It feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. You don't cry. You just wait. Because you've forgotten what comes next. Days pass. No one comes. Eventually, some soldiers, not Japanese, arrive. Maybe American, maybe Allied forces. They don't speak your language either. But their guns aren't pointed at you. No. They tell you it's over. The war. You look around. Over? Your body is still broken. Your home is gone. Your name barely belongs to you anymore. What's over, exactly? They ask questions. Where are you from? What's your name? How long were you here? You can't answer all of them. Some girls lie. Others are too numb to speak. They treat you like a victim. You don't feel like one. You feel like a shadow. There's no train waiting to take you home. No warm welcome. No apology. Just paperwork. Transit centers. Crowds. You're repatriated. A word that means you're someone else's problem now. They send you back to Korea. But when you arrive, it doesn't feel like home. Everything's changed. People are different. You're different. The village is smaller than you remember. Your father is gone. Your mother won't look you in the eye. The neighbors whisper. You hear the words. Shame. Dirty. Unmarried. It doesn't matter that you were taken, that you had no choice. They still see you as someone who brought dishonor. You try to explain. No one wants to listen. You try to work. No one will hire you. You try to start over, but there's nothing to start with. Some of the girls end up begging. Others go back to Japan not because they want to, but because there, at least, no one knows their past. You try to disappear into the city. You change your name. You change your story. But inside, the story hasn't changed at all. The nightmares still come. The bruises don't fade. The pain in your back doesn't stop. You stop looking in mirrors. You stop remembering birthdays. And most of all, you stop talking about it. Because no one wants to hear. Years pass. Korea rebuilds. The war becomes textbooks. But your war never ended. You marry late, if at all. If you have children, you never tell them the truth. You sit at the back of church. You speak softly in the market. You live quietly. But every night, the door still opens in your dreams. And to understand how the world let this story fade, how history decided it was easier to forget than to face, we have to look not at soldiers or generals, but at silence. At the silence that came after the boots stopped walking. Because that silence lasted longer than the war ever did. For decades, no one said the word, not in schools, not in newspapers, not even in families. Comfort woman. It vanished from public memory like it had never existed. The girls who survived, they were told to stay quiet. Not by soldiers this time, by society, by neighbors who didn't want scandal, by officials who said, it's best not to dwell on the past, by parents who told their daughters, no one will marry you if they know. So you stayed quiet. You were told you were lucky that you made it back, that you were still alive. But you didn't feel alive. You felt erased. You tried to go on, to work, to smile at the right times, to keep your secrets buried beneath the floorboards. But the truth doesn't rot. It just waits. Some women, not many, began to talk. Quietly. In private circles. One told a priest. Another confessed to a nurse. Some wrote letters that were never mailed. And then, in the 1980s, a few voices became louder. First in Japan, historians started finding documents. Old military records, budget sheets, medical logs. The system was real. The routes were real. Then in Korea, survivors started speaking up. The first was Kim Hak-sun. She was in her 60s when she stepped in front of a microphone and said the words out loud. I was a comfort woman. The room went silent, but it didn't stay that way. Her voice opened a floodgate. Others came forward. Women in their 70s, 80s grandmothers, with stories that had been choking them for decades. They described the trucks, the inspections, the men, the bleeding. They named the towns, the camps, the commanders. Each voice cracked the silence a little more, and for the first time, the world began to listen. International human rights groups launched investigations. Journalists tracked down records. Former soldiers, some wrinkled and remorseful, confirmed what had been done. The Japanese government wavered. At first, they denied it, said it was local pimps, said it wasn't systematic. But the evidence mounted, and the pressure grew. In 1993, Japan issued a partial apology, the Kono Statement. It acknowledged the military's involvement, the coercion, the trauma. But it wasn't enough, because it came with no legal responsibility, no compensation, no names, just words. And for the survivors, that wasn't justice. It was theater. So they kept fighting. Every Wednesday, they gathered outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul, rain or snow, with signs and photographs. They were old. Some came in wheelchairs. Some wore the white hanbok of mourning. But their voices? Clear, loud, unshakable. They demanded 3 things: a full apology, legal responsibility, historical recognition. They asked not to be remembered as victims, but as witnesses, truth tellers. And that's when the statues started to appear. Bronze girls in hanboks sitting in chairs, barefoot, with fists clenched, sometimes with a bird on their shoulder, representing peace, sometimes with an empty chair beside them for the girl who didn't survive. The statues spread across Korea, across the world. And they're not just memorials. They're mirrors. They ask one question: if this was your sister, your daughter, what justice would look like to you? But justice is still far off. There are textbooks in Japan that still don't mention it, politicians who still call it a lie. Even now, survivors face hate online, in person, from those who would rather silence than reckon. But the women persist, because they know that silence, not time, is what buries the truth. And to understand what that truth means today, not just for Korea or Japan, but for every conflict where bodies become battlefields, we need to look at how trauma travels, not just in memories, but through generations. Because the war ended, but its echoes didn't. The war never ended for the daughters. That's the part no one warned you about: the inheritance of pain. You didn't talk about what happened. You couldn't. But trauma doesn't disappear when you bury it. It ripples. It shows up in your silence at dinner, in the way you flinch at sudden noises, in the nightmares you never speak of. Your children watch you confused by the things you never explain. Why you cry during certain songs. Why you can't stand the sight of a soldier's uniform. Why you never hug them for too long. They ask questions. You change the subject. They ask again. You walk out of the room. Eventually, they stop asking. But they don't stop feeling it. Because pain, especially the kind buried deep, is generational. In Korea, an entire generation grew up surrounded by these silences. By grandmothers who looked away when war stories came on the radio. By mothers who never visited certain towns. By aunts who never married, never spoke of the past. And gradually, the children began to dig. In schools, in archives, in whispered family stories. Some found old photographs hidden in drawers. Some discovered names listed in dusty ledgers. Some stumbled across the word Ianfu comfort woman and realized they'd heard it before, spoken once, then swallowed. These children, now grown, began asking out loud, "What happened? Why don't we talk about it? Who are we if we don't carry this truth?" Artists painted murals. Writers published memoirs. Activists filed lawsuits. And the movement, once led by survivors, grew to include everyone who refused to let their stories fade. In universities, Korean scholars uncovered documents long buried in bureaucratic basements. In Japan, a few brave teachers refused to whitewash the curriculum. And in the streets of Seoul, the Wednesday demonstration became not just a protest, but a ritual of remembrance. Every week, new faces appeared. Teenagers, students, young women in uniform. Not forced uniforms, chosen ones. They stood beside the bronze statue, fists clenched, heads held high. They carried signs with messages written in bold, defiant brushstrokes. This happened. We remember. Never again. But remembering wasn't easy. Because the world has a habit of moving on, especially from stories that make it uncomfortable. News cycles shift. Headlines blur. Apologies come, then get retracted. Funding dries up. Testimonies get shelved. And some countries, even those who claim to champion human rights, turn their heads. Because the truth is this: the comfort woman system wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern, a dark shape repeated across history. You see it in Bosnia, Rwanda, the Congo, in detention centers, on battlefronts, in every conflict where a body becomes currency. This isn't just Japan's shame. It's the world's warning. And that's why the fight isn't over. Because as long as people in power still argue over definitions, as long as they treat apology like negotiation, as long as survivors grow old without justice, this story remains open. But there's hope. Because every week, new voices join the protest. Every year, more statues rise. Every generation that remembers adds weight to the truth. And in that weight, there is power. You may not have had a voice in that room, but now you have an echo, one that travels through time, not to erase the pain, but to carry it with honor. And to understand where this echo leads, we need to follow it to the women who never stopped speaking. Even when the world stopped listening, you meet them years later, the other survivors. Not in a prison, not in a camp, but in a room with folding chairs and weak tea. A community center in Seoul. There are maybe 6 of you the first time, a few more the second. Some lean on walkers, some on memories. You sit in a circle. You don't speak right away. But eventually, one starts. Her voice trembles, but her eyes are steady. She describes the station, the men, the endless days. And for the first time in decades, you hear your own story coming from someone else's mouth. You don't need to correct her. She already knows. That's how the healing starts. Not with answers, with echoes. You talk. You cry. Sit in silence. And in that silence, something grows, not forgiveness, not quite, but understanding. Together you stitch back parts of yourselves that had been torn away. One woman brings a photo faded, creased of the field where she was taken. Another passes around a handkerchief she embroidered during the war, still stained at the edges. A third can't stop shaking, but she sits there anyway, eyes wide, nodding as every word hits her like rain. Eventually, someone says what no one ever dared. We deserve more than this. More than silence. More than shame. More than history books that skip our names. So you begin writing letters, petitions, testimonies. Some are read before the United Nations. Some are ignored. Some are shouted down by men in suits who weren't even alive when it happened. But you write them anyway. You speak at schools. You visit memorials. You keep Wednesdays free. Because once a week, without fail, you show up outside the embassy with the others. You sit in protest, in memory, in defiance. At first, people walk by. Then they stop. Then they listen. Some bring flowers. Some bring cameras. Some bring their children. You watch a little girl stare at the statue at the bronze feet without shoes. She doesn't ask questions. Not yet. But you see it in her eyes. She knows this means something. And when she's older, maybe she'll come back. Maybe she'll sit in that same chair, hold the same sign, carry the same weight. You aren't trying to be heroes. You're just trying not to disappear. One woman, she's from Busan, writes a poem about the cot, about how it creaked even when no one was lying on it. She reads it at a rally. Her voice breaks halfway through, but she doesn't stop. Another woman from Jeju sews dolls. Each one wears a hanba. Each one has no mouth. She sells them to raise money for the cause. A few of you travel to Japan. You speak at universities. Some students cry. Some professors apologize. Some politicians call you liars. But the truth doesn't need everyone. It only needs to be heard. So you keep speaking, and slowly, the world responds. A museum opens in Seoul. A documentary premieres in New York. An international tribunal calls what happened to you by its real name: systematic wartime sexual slavery. 3 words that take a lifetime to say out loud. And yet, you do. Because by now, you've learned something powerful. You were never just victims. You were witnesses. And your voice even cracked, even hoarse, even old still matters. But you also know, time isn't on your side. The meetings get smaller. Some chairs stay empty. But the work continues. Because there's still one chapter left. The chapter where the world stops pretending. Where someone finally tells the truth without a footnote. And to reach that chapter, you need to return to the beginning, to the little girl who was taken, and remind her, you were not forgotten. She was 14, maybe 13, some say even younger. She had a name, a favorite food, a family who loved her. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a threat. She was a child. And then she was taken. Her name disappears from the school roster. Her shoes are still by the door, but she never comes home. At first, the family waits. They ask around. They go to the police. The officer tells them it's wartime. Things happen. Be patient. So they wait. The mother stops cooking her favorite dishes, says, "It hurts too much." The father stops talking. The siblings grow up under a silence so thick it stains the walls. Years pass, and she becomes one of those girls. The shame doesn't belong to her, but it clings to her name anyway. Some families pretend it never happened. Some move away. Some hang her portrait beside the family altar and light incense every year. But no one says the words out loud, because saying them makes it real. And real is unbearable. This is what's left of so many comfort women. A name scratched off a registry. A birthday forgotten. A story wrapped in shame. But not all of them stayed lost. Some came home and found nothing waiting. No apologies. No reparations. Not even a, "We're sorry this happened to you." Instead, they found blame. Why didn't you run? Why didn't you die instead? Why did they pick you? Questions asked not out of concern, but to cast stones. And so many of them swallowed their stories, wrapped them in cloth, tucked them into drawers, and carried the weight alone. But even silence leaks. in the way her hands tremble at the sight of a train, in the way she winces at the sound of boots, in the way she never lets her daughter go out alone. The trauma doesn't end with her. It passes on like an heirloom no one wants. But what if that little girl, the one taken, the one erased, could hear you now? What would you say? You'd tell her that none of this was her fault. You'd tell her she was not dirty. You'd tell her she was not alone. You'd tell her the world is finally beginning to speak her name again, that she matters, not because of what happened to her, but because she survived, and because she told someone, maybe just once, maybe in a whisper, maybe in a courtroom, but she told, and in doing so, she broke the chain. One link, at least. And that's enough to start. Because no girl deserves to be forgotten. Not in Korea. Not in history. Not ever. So now, we turn to the future. Because the fight for justice isn't over. It's still happening in classrooms, in courtrooms, and on quiet streets where bronze statues sit and wait for someone to ask, "What happened here?" It's early morning in Seoul. The sky is overcast, the kind of soft gray that makes everything feel quiet. And yet, outside the Japanese embassy, a storm is already brewing. Not of rain, of memory. They come every Wednesday. The survivors. The students, the daughters of daughters who never forgot. They come with signs, with cans, with flowers, and most importantly, with names. Names of women who lived and suffered and refused to vanish. The protest is peaceful, but it's not silent. They chant, they sing. They read testimony words, first whispered in trauma, now shouted in defiance. Each week, they demand the same three things: a full apology, legal accountability, and the correction of the historical record. They are not asking for pity. They are asking for truth. And still, the embassy windows stay shut. Still, the officials retreat behind carefully worded statements. Still, some politicians claim the comfort women were volunteers, that it was different back then. But across the street, the bronze girl sits. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't age. She just waits, shoeless, in a hanbok, fists on her knees. Beside her, an empty chair. It's for the one who didn't survive, or the one who couldn't speak, or the one who is still being silenced somewhere else in the world, in another war, under another flag. That's the thing no one wants to admit. This didn't end in 1945. It didn't end with treaties or apologies. Because the pattern didn't stop. In every war, in every generation, there are comfort women by another name. Women whose bodies are turned into weapons. Who are called spoils, or relief, or simply collateral. The system changes. The uniforms change. But the suffering stays the same. And the silence? It's still the most powerful weapon. But in Seoul, they're breaking that silence. Every Wednesday. Even when it snows. Even when only a few show up. Even when the world isn't watching. Because they believe that truth, even slow, even small, is stronger than forgetting. One protester is a high school girl. She's 16. She learned about the comfort women from her grandmother. Now she writes letters to the UN. She teaches younger students. She writes essays. Because she says if we don't remember, we repeat. Another protester is in her 80s. She used to be silent. Now she speaks at universities. She still trembles, still stammers. But she doesn't stop, because she says the shame wasn't hers, it was the world's. And that's the truth that keeps the protests alive. This isn't just about the past. It's about what we allow to happen in the future. About the stories we tell, the silences we break, the justice we demand even when it feels too late. And maybe, one day, a future Wednesday will come, when the statue is still there, but the embassy doors open, when an apology isn't just offered but meant, when no girl anywhere has to wonder if her suffering will be buried to protect someone else's pride. Until then, the bronze girl waits, and the voices grow louder. There's something strange about memory. It fades when you want to hold it, and lingers when you want it to leave. For comfort women, memory is both a wound and a weapon. The trauma lives on in ways that even they can't always explain. Some still wake up to phantom footsteps outside their door. Some can't sleep unless every window is locked. Some can't hear certain words in Japanese without their stomachs tightening into a fist. Even decades later, the body remembers. The doctors call it PTSD. The women just call it living. There's no closure, because no one ever said, "This was wrong," and made it stick. There's no healing, because the damage was never fully acknowledged, only debated. And so, memory becomes something you learn to carry, not like a photo in your wallet, more like a splitter in your spine. Still, some of them write. One woman fills notebook after notebook, not with perfect grammar, not with pretty words, just facts. How many soldiers? What days of the week? What she was wearing? Because she says, if the world forgets, her pages won't. Another woman paints. Not flowers, rooms, wooden cots, bars on windows. Each canvas is quiet until you notice the girl in the corner. Eyes too old, hands too still. She never explains them. She doesn't have to, because if you've lived it, you already know. Memory becomes art. Art becomes protest. And protest becomes the only way to live honestly. Still, there's a price. Families sometimes recoil. Not everyone wants to be related to a survivor. You hear phrases like, "Why bring this up now? It's embarrassing for the grandchildren. Let it go." But these women didn't carry this for 80 years just to let it go. They carried it because no one else would. Because the world, polite, educated, forward-looking, still hasn't figured out how to say, "We failed you." And yet, despite the shame, the pain, and the endless excuses, they remember. They testify in courtrooms even when their hands shake. They walk into classrooms and face students who squirm and look away. They hold up faded photographs of girls no one else remembers. Not to haunt, to honor. Because behind every statistic is a girl who loved singing, or sewing, or dancing in the rain, and was taken, and erased, and almost forgotten. But not quite, because now her story is being told. Maybe by her, maybe by a friend, maybe by a stranger with a microphone and the courage to ask, And that act-telling becomes sacred. Because in a world that buried them, memory is resistance. And the more people who hear it, the more the silence cracks. Which is why we now turn to one of the hardest truths of all. The comfort stations didn't end in 1945 for everyone. Because for some, they continued in different uniforms, under different flags, with the same horrors. The war ended on paper, the 15th of August, 1945. Victory declared, occupations dissolved, flags lowered. But for many Korean women, the nightmare didn't stop there. Because when the Japanese left, someone else moved in. The Americans, the Soviets, later, the South Korean government itself. And while the uniforms changed, the exploitation remained. This time, it wasn't called comfort women. It was called Western Princess, Camptown Woman, Entertainment Worker. Words meant to sound voluntary, safe, legal. But when you scratch the surface, the story looks hauntingly familiar. Poor women, rural villages, promises of jobs, and then barracks, curfews, abuse. Some of the same girls who survived the Japanese stations were later recruited or coerced into new ones, now serving American troops. They thought the suffering was over. They were wrong. In the 1950s and beyond, South Korea built Kijichon military camp towns around U.S. bases. And guess who was encouraged to work there? Young Korean women, sometimes former sex slaves, sometimes orphans, sometimes just desperate. And guess who helped manage them? The Korean government. They provided health checks. They issued licenses. They even trained women in etiquette, how to appeal to foreign soldiers. Why? Because foreign troops brought dollars. And in a post-war, struggling South Korea, those dollars mattered more than dignity. These women weren't just exploited, they were used as diplomatic currency, silently sacrificed in the name of alliance. Sound familiar? The pattern repeats just in a different key. Once again, survivors were told to stay quiet. Once again, society turned its back. Once again, trauma went untreated, unspoken, unresolved. And when these women aged, their stories were dismissed. Oh, they were just prostitutes. They chose that life. It's not the same. But listen closely, and the same notes echo. Recruitment under false pretenses, restrictions on freedom, physical and psychological abuse, lack of legal protection, social rejection, and permanent, invisible scars. The term comfort woman may have ended, but the system it described, it mutated, it migrated, and it survives in shadows to this day. Around U.S. military bases in other countries, in trafficking rings, in the silent consent of governments who look the other way. So when survivors of both eras speak, we must listen, not to compare their pain, but to recognize the structure, to see the scaffolding of exploitation, how it builds itself across borders, across decades, and always starts with one lie. This is for your country. This is your duty. This is what women are for. But now, these women are saying, no more. They are filing lawsuits, demanding apologies, telling their stories not as broken people, but as witnesses. And when they look into the camera, they don't ask for pity. They ask for truth. Because unless we understand how the cycle continued and who kept turning the wheel, We're doomed to keep repeating it. And to truly understand what these women endured, we have to stop looking at them as statistics and start seeing them as what they were: human, brave, and finally, visible. And finally visible. You would think that after all this time, justice would come easy. That once the truth was out, the apologies would follow, the reparations, the recognition. But no. Justice moves slower than pain. In the decades following the war, survivors waited. They waited for Japan to say something. They waited for their own government to do more. They waited for someone, anyone, to believe them. But for years, there was only silence. Japan's official stance shifted like smoke. First, denial. There's no evidence. They volunteered. It's fabricated. Then came the half apologies. We feel regret. We sympathize. We offer humanitarian aid, but not legal responsibility. One moment, an official bows. The next, another walks it back. Politicians argue over wording. Was it coercion? Was it slavery? Was it systemic? Meanwhile, the survivors age. Their knees ache. Their eyesight fades. And still, they wait. Some countries recognize them. A few textbooks mention them. A few statues go up. But others are torn down. In 2015, Japan and South Korea announced a final and irreversible resolution. The deal offered compensation, an apology, a fund. But it didn't ask the survivors. Most of them rejected it. Because money is not the same as accountability. Because saying sorry doesn't mean much if it's followed by silence or worse, slander. Some Japanese politicians have continued to call them liars, have visited war shrines, have tried to erase their stories from school books. In response, the women protested again. They said, "We are not political pawns. We are not ghosts. We are not going away." And slowly, the tide began to turn. International courts started using the word slavery. NGOs began cataloging their testimonies. Filmmakers told their stories. Young people learned their names. But justice, real justice, isn't just about the past. It's about making sure no girl, anywhere, ever, has to live that story again. So when survivors fight for recognition, they're not just speaking for themselves. They're speaking for every victim who never got the chance. Every girl who still doesn't planks. And every system that still profits from silence. You see, justice for comfort women isn't about rewriting history. It's about writing it down properly in the first place and making sure it's read. So the next generation doesn't just say never again. They mean it. That's why the statues matter. Why the protests matter. Why every trembling voice in every courtroom, classroom, and embassy hallway matters. Because for every woman who didn't survive, there's one who did. And she is still waiting, not just for an apology, but for the world to finally understand what it means to be stolen and to survive anyway. Now picture this. You're 92. Your bones ache in places you stopped naming decades ago. Your memories come and go, except the ones you wish would leave. Those stay sharp, sharper than ever. You sit in a wheelchair, blanket over your knees, in a sunlit room full of strangers who call you brave. And they mean it. But where were they when you were 16? Where were they when you bled? When you begged? When you came home and no one believed you? This is the final chapter for many survivors of the comfort women system. Not silence, not shame, but recognition. Hard won, often too late, but real. They spend their last years speaking to students, testifying before courts, giving interviews through translators. Not for fame, but because they know time is running out. In the early 1990s, survivors began stepping forward publicly for the first time. Kim Hak-sun was one of them. She stood before microphones, hands shaking, and said, "I was a comfort woman. I was taken." And the world blinked, then listened. Her voice cracked open a dam. Other women followed. From Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, the Netherlands. Each story unique, each one echoing the same betrayal. They found one another, formed networks, held support circles, marched in protests, Saturday in front of embassies with umbrellas and hope. They stopped being those women. They became leaders, historians, icons, and yet they also aged. Every year, fewer make it to the protests. Every month, another obituary, another empty chair. In 2007, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution demanding that Japan formally acknowledge and apologize for the comfort women system. Other countries followed. But resolutions don't erase trauma. They don't fix families broken by silence. They don't rewind time. Still, the women keep showing up. Not for themselves anymore, but for the girls who never came back, for the ones buried in unmarked graves, for the ones who were told to forget, for the ones still being hurt in other countries under different names. When asked what they want most, many say the same thing: for people to remember, for the truth to be taught, for their pain to mean something more than suffering. Because they know what happens when memory fades. The cycle starts again. The lies return. And the next girl goes missing, unnoticed, into the cracks of war. So they hold on to life, to voice, to justice, even if it comes after they're gone. Because the fight was never just for them. It was for all of us. So where do we go from here? The last comfort women are in their final years. Some no longer speak. Some no longer remember. And some, far too many, died long before the world ever knew what had been done to them. But their stories remain. Their names etched into granite. Their faces cast in bronze. Their voices sealed in recordings, testimony books, and in the quiet protest of 1,000 footsteps that still gather each Wednesday. This isn't ancient history. It's living memory. And it asks something from us. Not pity, not guilt, but responsibility. Responsibility to listen, really listen. To stories that are hard, to truths that are uncomfortable, to pain that doesn't neatly resolve in the final chapter. We owe these women more than flowers on an anniversary. We owe them education, awareness, justice that goes deeper than headlines and gestures. That means teaching the truth in textbooks, in museums, in every corner where young people learn what war really does to human bodies. It means confronting governments when they try to whitewash or deny. It means recognizing that systems of violence against women haven't disappeared. They've just adapted. Today, It's not the Imperial Japanese Army. It's human traffickers, peacekeepers gone rogue, paramilitaries, cartels, tourists with money and a passport. In every war, on every front, women's bodies are still being weaponized, and silence still protects the perpetrators. So when we remember the Korean comfort women, we're not just looking back. We're drawing a line in the present. We're saying, never again isn't a slogan. It's a commitment. It's listening when a girl says, something happened. It's believing her. It's demanding better systems, stronger protections, and a world that doesn't hide abuse behind the flag of national interest. Most of the women who survived the comfort stations didn't want to be heroes. They just wanted to be heard, to be seen as human again. And now, decades later, their courage is changing the way we talk about wartime atrocities, human rights, and gender-based violence. They turned their pain into protest, their memories into monuments, their stories into shields for the next generation. So when you walk past one of those statues, the bronze girl with her empty chair, stop. Sit beside her, if only in your mind. Because she isn't just a symbol of what was lost. She's a reminder that silence breaks, truth persists, and justice, even delayed, is still worth fighting for. So now you've walked with her. Through the camps, the courtrooms, the long waiting rooms of history. You've sat beside her silence, heard her whisper what no one wanted to believe, felt the ache of a life interrupted, then erased, then reclaimed. And maybe you thought you knew this story. Maybe you'd heard the term comfort women in a textbook once. Maybe it was a footnote, a paragraph, a phrase that sounded oddly soft for what it actually meant. But now you know that it wasn't comfort. It was coercion. It was captivity. It was cruelty, systematized, sanitized, and stamped into silence. And still, she survived. Not just the war, but the aftermath, the forgetting, the blame, the decades of being told, it's better not to talk about it. She talked anyway, and because of that, the world changed. A little, not enough, but enough to say she mattered, not just as a victim, but as a witness, as a woman who endured, then chose deliberately to remember. Now, that memory is yours too, and what you do with it matters. Because history doesn't just live in books, it breathes in us, in how we speak, in what we teach, in what we refuse to let slip back into shadow. So if you carry anything from tonight's journey, let it be this: that even one voice, shaking but unbroken, can defy an empire, and that remembering, truly remembering, is the first quiet step toward justice. Now sleep if you can, not because the story is over, but because someone finally stayed to hear it.